So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
There's pictures we've published on Crime World of you confronting a guy called John O'Neill, who hasn't really been photographed probably in over 20 years. It's one of these cases where he's now 77 and he was convicted of a particularly horrific murder. One that, you know, one of these really sort of senseless killings.
Yeah.
And of course, I think he's 77 now. So this is his first steps towards freedom, really.
Yeah.
Tell us about John O'Neill and what he's in prison for.
Well, John O'Neill has spent the last 20 years behind bars, or the last 22 years behind bars for the murder of a lady called Rosemary Dowling. Now, Rosemary was a mother of two who ran a small CD shop on Ainger Street. And unfortunately, she was brutally murdered on the evening of October 24th, 2005. Basically, what happened was John O'Neill would have been somebody who was known to be a chronic alcoholic. He had spent the day in the pub drinking, and on his way home that evening, he passed by Rosemary, who he would have known for, well, he told Gardaí later he would have known her for about a year. Now, Rosemary was also somebody who struggled with alcoholism.
And she was in around the same age, was she? She was in her late 40s.
I think, at the time. But basically, the two of them decided to go back to O'Neill's flat on Mercer Street to have a few drinks. Now, a few drinks became wines and beers. They were drinking in the sitting room. Now, they were seen on the way back to the flat. There was witnesses who described them both as being in good spirits, although they said that both of them appeared to be, you know, they both appeared
had a few drinks. Yeah.
So, you know, there's eyewitnesses who describe what happens up until they go back to the flat at about 7:30. But then at that point, obviously, the only information we have on what happened over the next 5 hours comes from John O'Neill. And that's important to say because he did give an account of what happened in the subsequent hours, but that's his account of it.
And of course, this is at this point he's already gone. When it comes to court, he's already effectively confessed to it. So
yeah.
What happens with these cases is, and of course you're right, it's sort of like the Richard Satchwell case where Richard Satchwell gave his version of events and it's very favourable to himself.
It's self-serving.
It's self-serving. And of course, as I'm sure we'll speak about it, John O'Neill's actions in the aftermath of this killing were also self-serving.
Right. Yeah.
But well, anyway, tell us what he said anyway in court.
Well, according to John O'Neill, they got back to his flat in Mercer Street at about 7:30 in the evening. They had some drinks, they had wine, they had beers, and he said this went on for a number of hours. And then at about midnight, he says they began undressing, that they were going to be intimate, that things moved into the bedroom. But he said at that point then something changed and that Rosemary became violent towards him. He claimed this is what his claim to the guards were. He claimed that she had scratched him and struck him, and then that she bit him.
Yeah. On his private parts, basically, yeah.
Yeah. And his claim was that he lost the head at that stage, that he grabbed a lump hammer from a toolbox in the room and that he chased her out into the hallway where he struck her across the head.
14 times, I think.
Well, his version is that he struck her across the head in the hallway, that after, and this is a lump hammer, mind you, so you can imagine the impact of being hit in the head by a lump hammer. She fell to the ground and that he then dragged her into a spare room where he repeatedly struck her with the lump hammer. Now, we found out later during the trial, he said he struck her repeatedly. We found out later from the state pathologist, Mary Cassidy, when she gave her evidence, that John O'Neill had actually struck Rosemary 14 times with the lump hammer, and that also when the postmortem was being carried out, that a piece of a blade that had been used to cut Rosemary's throat was still found lodged in her neck.
And so the reason that you'd throw shade on his account of events are, like, in theory, you can imagine if somebody is drunk and there's some sort of physical altercation and somebody may lash out at that moment, and that can have tragic consequences. A normal person can understand that, even while not excusing it. But he obviously pursues this woman after she's left the room.
And this is by his own account.
Savagely beats her with a lump hammer, not even once, but multiple times. Presumably at that point she is dead, and then he still attempts to cut her throat, or what appears to be something along those lines anyway.
Well, what we know from the post-mortem and the details that were given in the court was that most of the blows were struck after Rosemary was already either concussed or unconscious or unresponsive.
Yeah.
That was the evidence given by Mary Cassidy. Now, we also know that immediately, although he said he had no recollection of cutting Rosemary's throat, he said his mind had blanked out. We do know that fairly quickly after the murder took place, the cover-up began.
Yeah, exactly, because, again, we've all sat through cases where somebody has maybe lashed out, stabbed somebody or something, and then they effectively are found at the scene and they maybe confess to the police at that second. Like, that clearly did not happen in this case. He goes to, maybe not a particularly sophisticated, but a deliberate
he goes to very
goes to great lengths.
To conceal his involvement in the crime, and this takes place fairly quickly afterwards. So, he says that his mind went blank, and then within a short time period, he showers, washes the blood off himself, gets changed, and begins his attempt to cover things up. First of all, he wrapped Rosemary's body up in bedclothes. Then he removed a blood-stained armchair from the apartment, and he brought that up to a nearby laneway along with her clothes and the lump hammer, where he tried to set those items on fire. Then he went back to the apartment and he dragged Rosemary in the bedclothes out of the apartment and dumped her a short distance away. Now, he said that he dumped her in a place where he believed that she would be found quite quickly. Again, that would indicate an element of, somebody being quite calculated in what they were doing. Like the initial crime, it may have been panicked, but these are very deliberate steps to take in the aftermath.
There's a lot that distinguishes it from that sort of moment of madness sort of crime. Now, obviously, I think when he did come to court, he offered a manslaughter plea.
He did. He basically went into court and tried to plead guilty to manslaughter. Now, obviously, the DPP didn't accept that, and they went ahead with the murder trial. And there was sufficient grounds to proceed on a murder charge in this case. I mean, even in the manner that this crime was detected, for 3 days after Rosemary was killed, nobody was able to ID her because of the degree to which she'd been, beaten. So after she was found, after Rosemary's body was dumped, a short time later, a passerby, a guy called Fergus Shields, came across the blankets and the remains, and he rang the Gardaí. So the Gardaí obviously came out, sealed off the scene, and like a murder like that, it does attract a huge amount of attention. Over the course of the next day, investigations were taking place, and then I think it was on the Wednesday evening that while the Gardaí were carrying out door-to-door inquiries, a guard knocked on John O'Neill's door, a Garda called Laura Mannion, and he let her into the apartment, and straight away she noticed that something wasn't right here. There was an armchair missing. Now, obviously, there'd been an armchair found up the road and the lump hammer. So there was an armchair missing from the apartment. She also noticed bedclothes in the apartment that matched those that were found on covering Rosemary's body. So basically, she would have went back to Harcourt Street, and a warrant would have been sought to search John O'Neill's apartment. So the next day, the Gardaí, they arrive in force to carry out a search of the apartment, to do forensic testing and all those kind of things, which would have presumably resulted in him being got anyway.
Yeah.
So he left the apartment, and then a day later, he actually arrived into Harcourt Street Garda Station, demanding to know why the guards were turning over his apartment. And it was during these interactions that he told the guards, "Oh, I know the girl who was murdered." Now, funnily enough, the guards didn't know the identity of the woman who was murdered at that stage. Yeah. And there was detectives who obviously gave evidence during the trial, and I think it was Detective Superintendent P.J. Brown at the time who said that after he'd said he knew who the girl was and the guards were speaking with him, suddenly his head dropped and he said, "I did it, I murdered her." So, at that stage, things would have moved fairly quickly then, because the guards now had a name on the victim. They were able to compare dental records with those of the deceased, and they quickly established that it was Rosemary Dowling who had passed away. And then it would have, for the next 2 years, he would have been held in custody. And then obviously he was charged when the case went to court, and he was convicted in fairly short order. You're looking at a jury who listened to all the evidence, listened to his explanation that he claimed it was,
it's the provocation, of course, is what he's claimed. He was
what he was relying on.
Yeah, and I mean, as we said, like, you're relying on his account only. She's dead. There's not going to be any CCTV or anything like that. And obviously, this biting was the claim he made. Now, obviously both of these people, and Rosemary included, had a kind of complex lives going on. But you did hear the kind of human cost, I think, at the sentencing, when she had 2 kids. They were presumably very reliant on her, and they were very young. I think one of them was doing the junior cert, was it, at the time of sentencing? Yeah,
that's right. Sheila, or Rosemary's younger sister, she gave a victim impact statement, and in it she spoke about the horrible effect that this murder had on Rosemary's family. Rosemary was a mother at the time she was killed. She would have had a 7-year-old daughter and another daughter who was 11 or 12 years old. And although looking back, the stuff came out in the trial that Rosemary did have her own difficulties with alcohol. She had, got some very kind of minor, public order convictions arising out of that. She was also somebody who was making an effort to live her life. She was running the little record shop on Ainger Street. So the chance she had, and the chance her children had, she should still be living her life now
100%.
with them. And, John O'Neill took all that away from them.
Yeah.
So I suppose, which takes us back to, this week. I mean, John O'Neill has been behind bars for 22 years. I mean, he's currently inside Narborough Hill Prison. And these are the first steps he's now taking towards, regaining, I won't say full freedom, because lifers are only ever released on licensed release.
Yeah.
But he's now making his first steps back into society.
Yeah. Now he's 77 years old, is it? So he is an old man, and I know there are quite a lot of people of that age in the prison system, aren't there? They're accommodated. Where has he spent the most of his time, do we know, in terms of the prison?
Well, he would have spent the last few years inside Narborough Hill Prison. And Narborough Hill would be one of the prisons where, there's quite a number of the older life sentence prisoners who would end up there. And I suppose at this stage, it's just about managing his release. So one of the things that prisoners like John O'Neill do at this stage in their incarceration is they're allowed out on these day-long temporary releases to attend these college or adult education courses. Is probably a better description. They're about self-development. They're about giving these people the opportunity to learn techniques to stop them reoffending, and to better reintegrate into society. You're talking about even basic things like learning to use, a mobile phone, to adapt to smartphones, about, how to pay for stuff in shops. These are things that, as they happened all the way along, people pay no attention to. But if you take a 22-year break from society, the world has changed. So he's attending this course, and that's where we caught up with him earlier this week.
Now, he didn't speak. You asked him obviously about his crime, and if he wanted to speak on it, but he wasn't so inclined, was he?
No, he was very brusque. He just said he was sorry, but he had nothing to say about any of it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of, I don't know if irony is the right word, but he's obviously a very old man, but he still, you know, gets to live some sort of life at this point. I mean, it might not be, you know, the ideal sort of retirement or whatever, but he still gets to live a life that, of course, his victim doesn't. And, you know, there is something in that, I think, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something we come across again and again, the nature of the work we do. And there is, like, even in cases that don't involve, you know, in cases that don't involve a horrific murder like this one, but in equally horrific cases where we're talking about, you know, sexual abuse, the state goes to great lengths to, I suppose, to rehabilitate the perpetrators of the crime. And I think that's something that sometimes sticks in the throats of victims who don't feel the state offers the same supports to them.
Totally. I mean, and I mean, obviously we have a system, and the people who work in the system have to work that system in terms of the people in the jails or the probation services. But presumably, it costs a degree of money to send John O'Neill to a college course. Presumably he doesn't pay his own bus fare or whatever it is, and he probably buys lunch. Like, none of those financial supports really go to the victims. Now, we have improved to some extent.
We have, but we're talking, you know, it's a very lopsided system. Like the justice system, it does concentrate on the perpetrators rather than the victims. And I think that's something that we see again and again. It's not just when you're talking to individuals, but when you're talking to groups. Like, I mean, there's been various controversies like this, you know, counselling notes being handed over, you know, to the alleged perpetrators during rape trials. I mean, by any standards, you'd look at something like that and go, you know, that black and white, that's wrong. But then again, you know, you have to balance that with the legal process and people's, you know, the perpetrator's rights. And, you know, it's difficult to balance up the truth. Something can be morally wrong and yet legally correct. And
look, there's no doubt. I mean, it's such a thing that you just hear again and again and again, that ordinary people become victims of crime, whether through the murder of a family member or something they've experienced themselves. And it's absolutely disorientating, and they don't get the support that they need. They come from, you know, all sorts of backgrounds, but most of them never really having had to interact with, you know, the authorities, and they really, really do feel it as they go through courts and all of that. Like, it's, you know, you hear it again and again and again, and it is funny. John O'Neill, you know, I'm sure he doesn't like this being back in the papers, but
no, I'm sure he doesn't. But
he does also get to live a life again, and obviously, you know, Rosemary and obviously her kids presumably have had a lifelong impact of this crime as well.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is that, look, in any democracy, justice has to be seen to be done. And one of the things that should be seen is when these people are coming out of prison the same way as when they went in. I mean, John O'Neill was sentenced to life in prison. In this country, life doesn't mean life. It means, you know, somewhere between 22 and I think 27 years now is the average at the moment. So, you know, this is also part of the justice system, that when people like John O'Neill, who were sentenced to life in prison, are being let back out into society, well, then I think society has a right to know about that as well.
They do, and presumably the victims, in a lot of cases, I think they have to sign up to it, but they do get informed when people are coming out these days.
They do, but what you'll find in cases like this is there is a victim liaison officer set up by the Irish Prison Service to give victims that right. But when you're talking about crimes that, even though it's 2005, that seems, you know, to certain people that might seem like yesterday, but that's a historic crime, and that process wouldn't have been in place back then. So, you know, the relatives of...
Particularly they were in school, obviously, at the time.
Yeah, so like the relatives of, you know, people like Rosemary Dowling wouldn't necessarily be informed in advance that somebody like John O'Neill is getting out of prison.
I mean, basically, you have to contact the prison service and say, I'm a victim and I want to be made aware of it. They don't go looking for you to tell you. I don't.
No, and it is a brilliant service that's available for victims, because it gives them that security of knowing, if somebody's coming out for, if they're coming out for a hospital appointment or a court appointment, that the victims are made aware of that. It reduces the chance of them accidentally bumping into this person, say, where hospital appointments and stuff are concerned. But also it's the security of knowing that they'll be informed in advance if somebody's getting out of custody.
Yeah. Okay, Pat, the fascinating case, I think, on the whole. Very, very sad nonetheless.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans Boxing Way, and at least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans match had been heavily advertised, but the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that? Do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories, because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens, divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. There's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired, and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, people what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed? Because of that, they had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from The Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.